Outlaws in Skirts, the brutal truth about female criminals of the American Wild West. Between 1865 and 1890, fewer than 24 women in the American West were documented as active armed outlaws, fewer than 24. But the survival rate of these women in custody was less than half that of men arrested for the same crimes. Women caught carrying guns faced mob violence that sheriffs frequently refused to prevent. In 1877, a woman accused of horse theft in Wyoming was stripped naked, tarred, and driven into the desert by a citizens' committee before any trial took place. Her body was found 3 days later. No charges were filed against her killers. No investigation was opened. The case was recorded as community justice and filed away. You picture daring women in elegant riding clothes, pearl-handled revolvers, romantic rebellion against a patriarchal world, free spirits galloping toward the horizon, hair streaming behind them, defying the rules with a smile and the open sky as their only ceiling. The reality was constant sexual violence, immediate social annihilation, and a frontier justice specifically engineered to make a public spectacle of destroying women who dared step outside the boundaries of femininity. This wasn't punishment proportional to the crime. It wasn't even punishment designed to deter crime. It was ritualized degradation theater, conceived and performed to destroy a woman's humanity before destroying her body, and to ensure that every other woman watching understood the cost of stepping out of line. And here's the question that should keep you awake. Why did any woman choose this path, knowing the consequences were exponentially worse than for any man? Why would a rational human being opt for a life where capture meant not just death, but systematic public humiliation, designed to serve as a warning to every other woman on the frontier? By the end of this video, you'll understand why these women, fully aware they'd likely die violently and publicly, still chose the outlaw trail over their legal options. And that understanding will change how you see every Western you've ever watched. The names history remembers are all wrong. Belle Starr, Pearl Hart, Cattle Kate, Calamity Jane. Everything you think you know about these women is a lie manufactured by Eastern publishing houses that discovered real female criminals were too disturbing to print accurately. The Lady Bandit sold books, but only if she was completely reinvented. The truth was indigestible for the dime novel-consuming public, so they invented something else, and that invention is what reached us. But here's what nobody tells you. These women weren't anomalies in the frontier system. They were its inevitable product. You know the image. Hollywood has shown it to you 1,000 times. The Lady Bandit, fashionable split riding skirt, gleaming revolver, taking what she wants with a wink and a smile, riding free under open, endless skies, rebel by choice, free by nature. Now step into reality. A woman riding alone in men's clothing drew immediate suspicion in every frontier town she entered. Western communities operated on rigid mutual surveillance. Everyone knew everyone. Strangers were noted and questioned. And a woman without male escort was automatically classified as either a prostitute or mentally deranged. There was no middle ground. There was no benefit of the doubt. To operate as an outlaw meant abandoning any possibility of feminine respectability permanently, not temporarily, not as a costume, but as an irreversible social death sentence. The moment you crossed that line, there was no road back, none. Feel what this meant in the body. You're wearing men's trousers that chafe against skin unused to rough denim. Your hair is cropped short with dull scissors, because long hair identifies you as female from a distance and makes you a target. You haven't bathed in 3 weeks because river crossings expose you to violence from your own gang members. The wool shirt reeks of horse sweat, gunpowder residue, and your own fear stink. Your saddle sores have infected, and the skin around your inner thighs is raw, cracked, weeping fluid that sticks to the fabric every time you mount. There's no doctor you can see. Walking into any frontier physician's office means questions you can't answer and attention you can't afford. And the mental weight of maintaining a male disguise constantly, modulating your voice to sound deeper, the deliberate physical roughness in every gesture, the silent terror each time a gang member gets too close. What happens when cold weather forces everyone into a one-room hideout and maintaining physical distance becomes impossible? You don't sleep. You lean against the farthest wall with your hand on the knife handle, eyes half closed, pretending to rest, while every muscle in your body stays on high alert. Night after night, week after week, there's a specific loneliness in being unable to trust anyone. Not your gang, not townsfolk, not lawmen, not other women. You are an island of permanent vigilance surrounded by threats in every direction. The myth shows you a fearless woman commanding male respect through sheer force of personality, a magnetic presence that tames violent men with a single look. The reality nobody tells you is this: female outlaws operated in exclusively male gangs, where rape was considered tacit privilege, not crime. Pearl Hart, one of the few documented female stagecoach robbers, described sleeping with her knife drawn inside her bedroll every single night of her outlaw career. Every single one. Belle Starr, whose myth vastly outgrew her actual crimes, survived 2 attempted rapes by gang associates before age 23. The protection of male outlaw partners was conditional, transactional, and evaporated the instant you became a liability or the power dynamic shifted. You've just robbed a railroad office outside Dodge City, your 3rd job. The take was $340, split 5 ways. Back at camp, one gang member suggests your share should be reduced since you didn't do the heavy lifting. Another laughs. The gang leader, your supposed partner, doesn't intervene immediately. You calculate, reaching for your gun means 4 against 1. Not reaching means establishing a precedent that you're negotiable, that your body and your labor are community property. You accept 3/4 share, maintain unbroken eye contact while you do it, and sleep with your back against a rock that night, with your fingers wrapped around a knife handle. This isn't one bad night. This is every night for years. And when the compromise stops working, when someone decides they won't accept the negotiation anymore, you're alone with a knife against men who outmatch you in strength and numbers. Every alliance you form within the gang is a survival calculation: who to ally with, who to avoid, who to sleep with voluntarily as strategic protection against worse alternatives. That constant threat calculus consumed mental energy that male outlaws spent planning robberies. Now destroy the reluctant accomplice myth. Documented female outlaws weren't forced participants dragged along by charismatic men. They committed direct, premeditated violence. Cattle Kate, whose real name was Ella Watson, ran her own rustling operation, personally rebranding stolen stock with an iron she heated herself. Laura Bullion worked as lookout and courier for Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, handling money transfers that kept the entire gang mobile across state lines. Rose Dunn, whose brothers ran the Doolin Dalton gang, personally shot and killed a pursuing deputy during a farmhouse raid in 1895. These weren't abused women acting under duress. They were active, calculating criminals who understood exactly what they were doing and chose it anyway. Your hands shake for hours after shooting someone, not from regret, from adrenaline crash. You've just killed a Wells Fargo guard outside Amarillo. He was reaching for his rifle when you fired twice into his chest from 12 feet. You watched him fall, watched him try to breathe through punctured lungs, producing a wet sucking sound you'll hear in your sleep for months. Watched him stop. The gang is already moving, dividing his personal effects with practiced efficiency. You get his pocket watch, silver, engraved with initials that aren't yours and never will be. You'll pawn it in the next town for $4. That's what a human life converts to in your economy now. $4 and a memory you can't afford to process. The long-term psychological cost was devastating. Frontier violence accumulated in body and mind without any concept of trauma treatment. The drinking that most female outlaws used as self-medication, what it meant to harden yourself against empathy as a survival requirement, and how that hardening made you progressively more dangerous and more alone. When possess pursued female outlaws, the chase itself became sexually charged public spectacle. Newspapers advertised woman bandit hunts like sporting events, drawing crowds to watch. Rewards for female outlaws were frequently lower than for males, not because they were less dangerous, but because frontier justice preferred capturing them alive for public humiliation that served as deterrent theater. In 1889, Jenny Stevens was paraded through Denver in chains after a botched bank robbery, while her male gang members were simply jailed. The crowd threw objects. Newspapers described her clothing, her body, her monthly cycle, intimate details never printed about male prisoners. Her degradation was the punishment more than any sentence a judge would impose. You're in a grain storage shed outside Topeka, surrounded. You've been running for 6 days since the train robbery went wrong. Your partner was shot dead at the depot. You're alone. The posse knows you're here. They're waiting for dawn, so the whole town can watch. You have 3 bullets left, and you're making the only decision that matters. Surrender and face what comes next, or make them kill you here in the dark where nobody's watching, where nobody can photograph your body, where the spectacle dies with you. You've heard what happened to the last woman outlaw captured in Kansas. They shaved her head before the hanging so the crowd could see her face better. You're weighing 3 bullets against that future. Frontier jails weren't equipped for female prisoners. Women were held in the same cells as male inmates or in makeshift enclosures, storage rooms, basement compartments, even chicken coops converted with hasty iron bars. Sexual assault by guards and fellow inmates was so routine it rarely warranted documentation. Pearl Hart served 5 years in Yuma Territorial Prison, where she was the only female inmate for 3 consecutive years. Her cell had no privacy partition. Guards watched her use the waste bucket. She had no access to menstrual supplies, an 8-by-6-foot cell. Male inmates in adjacent cells separated only by bars. 11 days waiting for trial. Constant verbal harassment. 1 daily meal of cornmeal mush and rancid salt pork. Dysentery, menstrual bleeding without rags. A torn skirt hem improvised into something barely functional. The complete absence of physical privacy as a form of continuous psychological torture. Weeks and months of this reality produced dissociation, rage, strategic numbness, the mind retreating from what the body couldn't escape. Pearl Hart described the experience in a single sentence. Prison was not the worst thing that happened to me, but it was the longest. The American frontier didn't produce female outlaws by accident. It manufactured them through deliberate, systematic legal and economic exclusion so complete that criminality became rational response. Frontier law prevented women from owning property in most territories until the 1880s. Widows lost homesteads to male relatives automatically. Divorced women, rare and socially destroyed by the act itself, had no legal right to marital assets, livestock, or equipment. A woman without male sponsorship had exactly 3 legal survival options: domestic service at $6 to $8 monthly, less than a male laborer earned in a week, prostitution, or starvation. There was no 4th option. There was no appeals process. There was no charity system. Do the arithmetic of desperation. $6 a month. A rented room in a frontier town cost $3. Food cost $4. Before even thinking about clothing, soap, kerosene, or any other basic necessity, the math already produced an impossible deficit. General stores offered credit at interest rates that turned small debts into permanent shackles. Land companies kept women financially dependent through contracts they couldn't legally contest because they lacked full legal standing in territorial courts. Poverty wasn't an accident. It was by design. See this in real lives. Cattle Kate turned to rustling after her husband abandoned her with $47 in debt to a land company that refused to recognize her homestead claim because she was female. Belle Starr's outlaw career began after her Confederate sympathizer family lost everything in post-war Missouri property seizures she couldn't legally contest because women had no standing in territorial property courts. These weren't women who woke up wanting to be criminals. They were women who exhausted every legal alternative and found them all locked. Most documented female outlaws had previous lives in frontier prostitution, not by romantic choice, but because it was the only survival mechanism after social rejection. Rose Dunn started in an Oklahoma brothel at 15 after her father died and left the family with nothing a woman could legally claim. Laura Bullion worked Texas saloons before joining the Wild Bunch. The transition from sex work to outlawry wasn't a dramatic transformation. Both existed outside legal society. Both carried the same permanent social death sentence, but outlawry offered theoretical upward mobility that prostitution never would. A prostitute's earnings went to her madam and her landlord. A robber kept her share if she could defend it. Consider the economics of frontier prostitution in concrete terms. A working girl in a Dodge City brothel earned between 50 cents and $2 per customer, of which the madam took half. The crib, her rented room, cost her $10 a week. Clothing, cosmetics, and alcohol required to function cost another $5. Medical treatment for the venereal diseases that were functionally inevitable consumed whatever remained. By her late 20s, the aging curve pushed her out of even this survival mechanism. Younger women arrived on every stagecoach, and madams discarded older workers with the same indifference they showed worn-out furniture. A woman at 30 with no savings, no skills recognized by legal economy, no family connections, and a reputation that barred her from respectable employment had exactly one direction left to move. Outlawry wasn't a fall from grace. It was a lateral transfer between two forms of social death, except this one let you keep your own money if you could defend it with a gun. Crime looked like a promotion because mathematically it was. When territories captured female outlaws, punishment extended far beyond legal sentences into deliberately sexualized humiliation, designed to reinforce gender hierarchy through spectacle. Newspapers published physical descriptions bordering on pornographic. Courts allowed public physical examination of women's bodies as evidence of moral corruption. In 1885, a female horse thief in Montana was forced to strip to her undergarments in open court, while a physician testified about her moral degeneracy based on physical examination. The courtroom was packed with spectators. This wasn't criminal justice. It was publicly sanctioned sexual violence wearing legal costume. Frontier communities viewed female criminality as fundamental social disorder requiring extra-legal correction beyond anything applied to male criminals. Vigilante committees that might give male outlaws a relatively fair hanging often subjected women to extended public torture before execution. In 1881, a suspected female accomplice to a stagecoach robbery in Arizona was tied to a wagon wheel overnight in the town square, exposed to weather, crowd abuse, and physical assault before being driven out at dawn. She was never formally charged. The community considered public degradation, sufficient punishment, and sufficient warning. These communities reacted with disproportionate violence because female criminality threatened the foundational gender contract that made isolated frontier settlements function. An unnatural woman represented an existential threat to social order in ways male criminals simply did not. A male outlaw broke laws. A female outlaw broke the conceptual framework that held frontier society together, the unspoken agreement that women would provide domestic stability, sexual availability within marriage, and moral legitimacy to communities that had precious little of any of those things. When a woman picked up a gun and declared herself outside that contract, she wasn't just committing a crime. She was demonstrating that the contract itself was rejectable, that women could look at what frontier civilization offered them and say no, and that possibility terrified frontier communities far more than any amount of stolen cattle or robbed stagecoaches ever could. The violence wasn't about justice, it was about sealing the crack in the foundation before other women noticed it was there. And then the myth-making machine did its work. Eastern publishing houses discovered that lady bandit stories sold better than male outlaw tales, but only if they were heavily, almost completely fictionalized. Real female outlaws were too disturbing for mass consumption. They challenged fundamental gender assumptions. They performed direct lethal violence. They made autonomous, rational choices in a culture that defined female rationality as impossible. Publishers created Belle Starr as a romantic Confederate rebel in elegant riding dress who stole from Yankees with aristocratic flair. The real Belle was a hard-scrabble rustler who died at 41 from a shotgun blast to the back, probably murdered by a neighbor over a mundane property dispute. Not a romantic betrayal, not a dramatic last stand, just frontier economics. Calamity Jane became a sharp-shooting frontier heroine in fringed buckskin. The real Martha Jane Canary was an alcoholic teamster who occasionally worked as armed escort, but never committed a major crime and died broke in a South Dakota boarding house. American culture needed female outlaws to be either victims or exotic anomalies, never autonomous violent criminals making rational economic choices. Acknowledging that dozens of women chose outlaw life despite knowing the consequences meant acknowledging that legal frontier existence for women was often worse than outlaw death. It meant recognizing that frontier civilization, the very system Americans celebrated as nation-building mythology, was so structurally violent toward women that some calculated immediate brutal death was genuinely preferable to slow legal degradation. That truth was, and remains, too uncomfortable for national mythology, and so romanticized female outlaws became feminist icons stripped of their actual desperation. Hollywood perpetuated dime novel fantasies into the 21st century, and the real women disappeared behind their own myths. The erasure compounded across generations. Each retelling smoothed another edge, replaced another scar with glamour, traded another act of desperate survival for cinematic rebellion. By the time the 20th century was done with them, these women had been laundered so thoroughly that their real suffering became invisible, replaced by leather corsets and witty one-liners that would have been unimaginable to women sleeping with knives in their fists. And the consequence rarely mentioned in any account, several documented female outlaws had children. Belle Starr had 2. Cattle, Kate, had 1. Upon the mother's arrests or deaths, children were seized by territorial authorities and placed in orphanages or with respectable families. Records were deliberately falsified to hide the maternal connection. Birth documents altered, names changed, histories erased. This wasn't incidental bureaucratic process, it was deliberate policy. Frontier society understood instinctively that acknowledging female criminals as mothers would humanize them, would suggest maternal capacity despite criminal behavior, would complicate the essential narrative that these women were unnatural aberrations rather than human beings responding to inhuman conditions. A woman widowed on a Kansas homestead in 1878 had no legal right to continue her dead husband's land claim. Her options were 4. Remarry immediately to any available man, regardless of character. Return east penniless to family that might not exist. Enter prostitution or starve. If she chose instead to defend her claim with a rifle, as dozens of documented women did, she became, by legal definition, an outlaw. When she started altering cattle brands to feed herself through winter, she confirmed it. When she shot the land company agent who came to evict her, she sealed it. The outlaw choice wasn't romantic rebellion against a colorful frontier. It was economic triage performed by women who could do arithmetic. They calculated that a short, violent life with autonomy beat a long legal life of complete subordination, sexual exploitation, and economic starvation. They weren't wrong about their options. They were just wrong about their chances. Of approximately 20 documented active female outlaws in the American West between 1865 and 1895, 12 died violently before age 35. 5 died in prison or shortly after release. 2 disappeared entirely from all records, almost certainly killed in circumstances never documented. And only one, Laura Bullion, lived to old age, dying in 1961 at age 85 in Memphis, Tennessee, having worked as a seamstress for decades and never once spoken publicly about her Wild Bunch years. She took her story to the grave because she understood what history would do with it. Pearl Hart, after serving her sentence at Yuma, spent the rest of her life in deliberate obscurity, working as a cigar roller under an assumed name. She gave one newspaper interview in 1924, where she stated flatly, "I don't regret the robberies, I regret surviving them." She understood what the statistics confirmed. Female outlaws who died young became myths people could romanticize. Those who survived became cautionary tales too disturbing for comfort, living reminders that polite society preferred to forget, living proof that the frontier system was designed to break women, and that some women broke it back before it killed them. So next time you watch a Western where the lady outlaw rides off into the sunset with her chosen man, hair flowing, dignity intact, remember Cattle Kate. Remember that her real name was Ella Watson. Remember that she was lynched by wealthy cattlemen from the Wyoming Stock Growers Association who wanted her land and her water rights and found it simpler and cheaper to hang a woman than to litigate against one in a court she might actually win. Remember that she was 29 years old. Remember that the association hired a photographer to document her hanging body as a warning to other women who might consider defending property claims against powerful men. Remember that no one was ever prosecuted for her murder. Not one person. Not ever. The women who chose the outlaw trail in the American West weren't romantic rebels galloping toward freedom. They were desperate economic refugees navigating a frontier system designed to eliminate female autonomy entirely, systematically, by law and by custom. They understood that their legal options meant permanent subordination, sexual exploitation, or death by starvation. So they chose illegal options that also meant death, but with temporary freedom, temporary dignity, temporary ownership of their own choices first. It was brutal calculus performed by women with no illusions about their outcomes and no better alternatives. We've built a society where women can own property, file lawsuits, defend themselves legally, survive economically without male sponsorship. The distance between Belle Starr's world and ours measures exactly how recently fundamental female autonomy became legally possible and how fragile those protections remain. But history still insists on romanticizing these women instead of understanding them, because understanding them means acknowledging how violent frontier civilization actually was toward half its own population, and how much of America's founding mythology depends on not looking too closely at who paid the price. These women deserve accuracy, not mythology. They deserve to be remembered as what they actually were: rational, desperate, violent, courageous, human, not as fantasies manufactured by publishing houses that found real women too threatening, too complicated, and too dangerous to print. What shocked you most about the reality of female outlaws in the Wild West? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to know which detail broke your assumptions hardest. If this video changed how you see frontier history, hit that like button. And subscribe for more deep dives into the American Old West as it actually existed. Brutal, complicated, unflinching, and absolutely nothing like what Hollywood sold you.